All right, welcome to America This Week. I'm Matt Taibbi.
And I'm Walter Kern.
You know, detect that note of uncertainty in my voice? Like, I'm pretty sure I'm Matt Taibbi. The world's so topsy-turvy this week that I'm no longer sure about really anything.
And I can tell you amazing advances are being made in the AI duplication of visual realities. So, Matt, next time we're going to have a sign worked out, a kind of safe word, which means
I am not an AI.
I am flesh and blood.
Kenneth, what is the frequency?
Yeah. Someday we're going to forgive him for that.
We are, yeah.
We're going to see he was asking the question that one should ask of apparently perfect holograms that meet you on the street.
Do you think someone's going to say it at Rather's funeral?
What's the frequency, Dan?
Dan, what is the frequency?
It's low, very low.
It's low. Okay, people probably don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So there's been a billion things that have happened. I guess somebody tried to kill Putin, right? Maybe.
Well, at least one of his limos blew up, right?
One of his limos blew up, and there's been a conspicuous lack of coverage of that incident in this country.
Well, seeing as it came directly after Zelensky had said he was about to die, it was a little curious, wasn't it?
Yeah, Newsweek is the biggest outlet that I've seen that actually ran a story on it.
And it's unclear to me anymore what Newsweek is.
Yeah, I don't know what Newsweek is either.
Yeah.
Is it American? Is it real? I have no idea. Donald Trump essentially came out and talked about running for a third term, which has everybody wigging out, and it's weird. And I only just heard about it, so I don't know what to say.
I know what to say.
Okay,
I'm a student of Trump's gaffes, quote unquote. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Almost all of his gaffes, and I don't have the examples at the ready, but I assure you I can next week if challenged, are usually signals that something is to come, something is to be revealed, that even though it might sound outrageous, there is a off-stage aspect. So I would guess that he's referring to exposés of election fraud, and that he's talking about the imminence of various revelations, maybe about 2020.
Okay, I hope so.
You're listening to the guy who told you what would happen with Luigi.
No,
you can bookmark this one too.
Look, Walter, when it comes time for me to rearrange my portfolio, I'm going to be calling you. Which stocks to short, all that. Okay, so that happened. There was other stuff. The big international news today is yesterday. I don't know, when did this first become a big story? The disqualification of Marine Le Pen.
Well, I first heard about it this morning. I don't know when it became a big story, but the American news media, which sometimes is late on the uptake, reported it today.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned.
So this was reported today, but and then there's also the separate story about her conviction on an embezzlement case. Now, even her detractors, and for those who don't know, Marine Le Pen is a far right. I guess you call her far right. She was
a socialist a few years ago.
Yeah, and following the standard trajectory, right? She is much loathed by the kind of neoliberal establishment. Always has been. Her father as well, right?
Well, her father was, yeah.
Yeah, and even her detractors in this case, and forgive me, I'm not terribly familiar with the embezzlement case for which she was sentenced to 4 years. But the case does not sound like it's airtight. And a lot, there is a lot of speculation that it was politically motivated, and there is already an enormous international sort of surge in a dialogue about this entire thing that we're going to have to come back to, because as much as we did read about that, Walter, I think you and I both spent a lot of time today on another story, which is
Can I say just one thing about Le Pen?
Sure. Yeah.
Someone in the comments said the Le Pen case is a lot like the case in New York against Trump.
Yes.
Was. Now, embezzlement and the how funds are used and appropriated is rather exploitable matter, I would say, when it comes to the law. You know, one person's embezzlement is another person's just spending money from an account that they thought they could spend money from. We presume innocence in America, and I presume innocence in general in criminal cases. In other words, I think that the standard for taking the leading presidential candidate or the leading candidate in a future election and just putting them in jail so that they can't run should be very high. Okay.
Yeah, you and I talked about this before, right? When they did the Espionage Act raid on Trump. But go ahead.
Yeah, and in Romania, we've talked about that election in which a leading candidate, quote, far right, was also denied the ability to run. So I'm going to be watching this with interest, but I will say this: France, because of the French Revolution, and America, because of the American Revolution occurring at somewhat the same time, are the real cradles of modern democracy. And they are the countries for which the big statues of women with swords and torches and so on exist. And France has an extra virtue in terms of its passion for democracy, which is that they love to take to the street in France. I mean, you lower the age of government pensions in France and Paris goes crazy.
Right.
So,
you cut the lunch hour by 8 minutes and
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see a very interesting narrative develop from this because, as I say, the French tractors are all fired up, I'm sure. And the yellow vests, of whom we haven't seen a lot in international news.
Yeah, they're theoretically on the other side, but I've heard grumblings already but go ahead.
Yeah, so have I. So I think it's worth our viewers paying attention to this, and we will too. We won't discuss it today because we don't go off half-cocked here. We try not to.
Well, we may come back to it, if only to talk about the New York Times reaction to it, which was astounding.
But let's talk about the reaction to something else.
So the New York Times has, I thought I had lost my ability to be shocked by the Times, and they came out. Their veteran reporter Adam Entis, and we can get to who he is in a moment. He is a notable figure in the history of kind of modern intelligence stories. He is bylined on some very important ones, and has been the chronicler, kind of the quasi-official chronicler of the Ukraine conflict, as told by, I would say, sort of the U.S. European axis of officials, from their side of the story. He did an enormous piece, and we'll show you a piece of video in a second of him describing it. Last year, he released a huge, almost novel-sized investigation of how the CIA was helping. Here's the story. How the spy war, how the CIA secretly helps Ukraine fight Putin. And that was a much cheerier story. Actually, why don't we just go ahead and hear the video listen to this brief video from Adam Entis, also just to give you a sense of who Adam Entis is.
The CIA had to get basically dragged kicking and screaming into Ukraine because it just didn't trust the Ukrainians because, before Yanukovych was overthrown, the Ukrainians were in bed with the Russians. Their services were completely compromised by the Russians. And naturally, the CIA wasn't sure who it could trust over there. And so very much like the story really is of the Ukrainians sort of aggressively courting the CIA and trying to drag them in. And the CIA then, once they are in, realizes what an opportunity this is for them. And then they embrace it. The CIA had to get basically...
Okay, so that's it.
An opportunity for what?
An opportunity for influence, and we'll get into some more of that because he also talks about what an opportunity the war turned into, even though it went south. So it's a year later. Adam Entis writes another piece. It is gigantic. It is a 13,500 piece word article. What's the title exactly again?
The Secret History.
The Secret History. What is he, Justinian, right?
Right.
Or is it Juvenal? Who wrote the Secret History?
All of his pieces are the secret history of something. That was the secret history of CIA involvement. And this is the secret history of American involvement in general. And frankly, it obviates his first secret history because, well, we'll go into that.
Yeah. So it's an unbelievable article. So, I don't even know whether to knock Adam Entis necessarily, because this is really a story about the sources. Now, he says he interviewed 300 people, and I'll find the exact, what exactly did he say? Adam
and
Entis,
it was a year in preparation, meaning it began as soon as the other one ended, I guess.
Exactly.
His reporting.
Yep, last March. So he says he conducted more than 300 interviews over more than a year with government, military, and intelligence officials in Ukraine, the United States, Britain, Germany, Poland, Belgium, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Turkey. Now, there is a lot of stuff in here, but the key thing, I think, to summarize broadly, Walter, it's all of the people who have now been sidelined from running the show in Ukraine from the American side, doing, I think, two things. One, covering their asses about their failures and dumping them really on Ukraine, mostly. A little bit on Trump, mostly on Ukraine.
About 85% on Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly.
12% on Trump. And 3% in a way that's really blameless on the American officials. They're only and us, the Americans, right? But our only sin, and the Biden administration's only sin, being not to press harder with those Ukrainians who screwed things up.
Right, exactly, and so. It does an extraordinary thing. I mean, I guess we should just start by just explaining what the headline revelation is. If we can blow the text up here a little bit, it just starts off by telling you 2 months after the beginning of the war that a pair of Ukrainian generals were whisked off the street, driven across the country by British commandos in plainclothes, whisked across the border to Poland, where they got on a plane and flew to Wiesbaden, Germany. And the two generals are led through a dark hallway above a gym called, I think it's called the Tony Bass Auditorium. We can scroll down just one more to the next thing. And here we go. All right. One of the men, Lieutenant General Mikhailo Zabrodsky, remembers being led up a flight of stairs to a walkway overlooking the cavernous main hall of the garrison's Tony Bass Auditorium. Before the war, it had been a gym. Now General Zabrodsky peered down on officers from coalition nations in a warren of makeshift cubicles. This is reportorial cleverness. We are being led down a rabbit hole. It's a warren of cubicles. Organizing the first Western shipments to Ukraine of M777 artillery batteries or howitzers and 155 millimeter shells. And then he's led to an office with an American general counterpart. And then there's this key paragraph. It's
Christopher Donahue. Let's remember that name, because he's a combination of Superman, Ulysses S. Grant, and other things. God, yeah,
right. Zeus.
It continues to be almost until the very end.
Bruce Banner.
Yeah.
So its evolution and inner workings visible only to a small circle of American and Allied officials, that partnership of intelligence, strategy, planning, and technology would become the secret weapon in what the Biden administration framed as its effort to both rescue Ukraine and protect the threatened post-World War II order. Now, essentially what he's telling you is that the operational headquarters of the war is in Wiesbaden, Germany.
Yes.
And that it was an extraordinary success. If you scroll down a little bit, that's the first thing you're going to hear.
But wait.
Okay.
I thought in his last article about the secret history of our involvement, that we were dragged kicking and screaming.
We were
dragged kicking and screaming by the Ukrainians. Wait, no, we sent apparently, or the British.
We sent British lackeys to grab them off the street.
We sent British lackeys, grab them off the street. They didn't know where they were going, and they were led down a warren of cubicles to HQ. That's not dragged kicking and screaming, is it? That's the very opposite.
Yeah, it feels.
They were dragged kicking and screaming.
Right. Exactly.
Not kicking and screaming, but
dragged.
Yeah.
So then he sets us up. Says today that post-World War II order, along with Ukraine's defense of its land, teeters on a knife edge as President Trump seeks rapprochement with Mr. Putin and vows to bring the war to a close. So again, this is an ass-covering article. It's going to be all about blaming everybody for how everything got so fucked up. And so this is one of the first lines. So it's Trump's fault here.
Wait a second. Yes, it's framed as an article about all the things that went wrong and all the things that almost went right. Really right. In a way that if it wasn't for that pesky Zelensky, and you're going to see that heads are going to spin and necks are going to snap, because the New York Times would have us go from absolute Zelensky worship. There he is at the Oscars. There he is at the White House. There he is signing shells with Josh Shapiro, to that bullheaded weirdo who screwed up all our plans.
Right, and we would have succeeded if it wasn't for you meddling kids. And it's Zelensky is the villain in this story. It's unbelievable. We were just.
I would be at least pasting on a mustache right now if I was Zelensky, shaving my head, putting on elevator shoes, and pretending to be part of a circus troupe touring Central Asia.
Yeah, when the CIA puts out they didn't put it out, but when a CIA-friendly 13,000-word article blaming you for everything that went wrong comes out, it's time to maybe think about a different different
posing as a circus tamer in a traveling gypsy band. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so they set us up. The beautiful post-war order is about to collapse. Mr. Trump has already begun to wind down elements of the partnership, sealed in Wiesbaden that day, that glorious day in the spring of 2022. Yet to trace its history is to better understand how Ukrainians were able to survive across 3-year-long years of war. So we kept them alive for that long.
Oh, exactly. Talk about moving the goalposts.
Now we're
surviving long enough to lose 400,000 of your people is now victory.
Right. Yes.
Or the best you can expect.
With our help, but yes, 400,000. It could have been worse without us. Who knows how many would have been. So and now Entis is going to tell us what a unique kind of story this is, which he's entitled to do because it is. It's also to see through a secret keyhole.
In other words, the New York Times.
Yeah, exactly. How the war came to today's precarious place.
Why was it, Adam, that you alone among men on earth were placed at this keyhole to watch something that was conducted, now we are about to learn, almost entirely by the U.S. military, using the Ukrainian military as something even less free than marionettes, it turns out.
Right.
I mean, we're going to find out in this article that the Ukrainian freedom fighters and the wily and determined forces of Ukraine were run from Washington with something like the same liberty that you control a video soldier with a joystick.
Right. Yeah. It's like Madden 2025. Madden Ukraine war version. And the article could have been titled "Why couldn't Ukrainians be more like the Arvin soldiers?" Or it's essentially criticizing them for being not servile enough. But anyway, so he goes on.
Here's one of my favorite paragraphs.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
With remarkable transparency. Now, remember, we're just being told we're looking through a secret keyhole, right? We're going to find out things that we've never been told before about how the Americans ran this war. But before we get to that, let's throw them a bone and say that the Biden administration was very transparent about one thing: numbers. With remarkable transparency, the Pentagon has offered a public inventory of the $66.5 billion array of weapons, including.
By the way, I'm sorry to interrupt. The $66.5 billion is only the stuff that is strictly military, and
right.
So that is a way of making the number seem smaller than it really was.
Minimum. Oh, you mean more than, or the $500 billion of it, of the $500 billion of dollars of aid in general that comes down to just real hardware with explosives in the tip.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
An array, including at last account, more than 500 million rounds of small arm ammunition and grenades, 10,000 Javelin anti-armor weapons, 3,000 Stingers, 272 howitzers, 76 tanks, 40 HIMARS, and 20 Mi-7 helicopters, and 3 Patriot air defense batteries. What stunning transparency it is to know exactly the number of things we sent them without knowing the fact that we were running every aspect of their use.
Right. And that deploying these weapons scared the shit out of even us, as we were about to find out.
Right.
But
they left the Atacams out of there, but
yeah, exactly. Well, even the HIMARS, though, turned out to be, the partnership itself turns out to be a problem. So, but you can feel as he's writing this that something is moving in the pants of whoever wrote this.
This is his last big tongue bath for a while. So, get ready for the bad news. The stunning transparency about all these individual bullets and the numbers of them will now be followed by the really shocking fact that America has been directly at war with Russia using some remote control troops.
Right. So, okay. So if we scroll down a little bit, and let me take a look here. All right. So then he talks about the New York Times investigation. And by the way, the sourcing on this, although there's that little paragraph up above that talks about the 300 interviews, there's almost nobody who's mentioned by name in the piece. There are a few, but mostly this is, it's legit. It's a legitimate way to do an article, but there's not a whole lot of name sources in the piece. So then it talks about how disastrous, just from a quantitative standpoint, the war is, how many people have died. And then there's this sort of
by U.S. counts, let's remember. This is also the Pyrrhic victory news that, Ukraine, a tiny country compared to Russia, has lost 435,000, while the Russians have lost 7. Well, if you compare the populations of the two countries, that means percentage-wise, Ukraine has lost a vast amount of its whole population compared to Russia.
Yeah, and we'll get to a strange detail about that too, about who exactly it was that's dying and who isn't later, as our defense secretary finds out essentially by accident at the end of the war. Okay, and there's a key little passage here. Side by side in Wiesbaden's Mission Command Center, American and Ukrainian officers planned Kiev's counteroffensives, a vast American intelligence collection effort both guided big picture battle strategy and funneled precise targeting information down to Ukrainian soldiers in the field. One European intelligence chief recalled being taken aback to learn how deeply enmeshed his NATO counterparts had become in Ukrainian operations. They are part of the kill chain now, he said. Remember, we were told something very different throughout this entire process, right? Like just last year, we were told they were dragged kicking and screaming into this partnership. Now we're learning that America was fully enmeshed in the war to a degree that we first learned shocks a NATO official, right?
And which you're about to learn, just to preview what's coming, is almost unprecedented in the annals of war, because what we were expecting of the Ukrainians was that people 1,300 miles away in the United States and people however far away in Wiesbaden would be able to pinpoint targets and then just have the Ukrainians go destroy them without asking how we'd pinpointed them, why they should destroy them, and so on. In other words, we asked for the right to micromanage the movement of troops, the firing of shells, and so on, in a way that was not contextually explained to the people who were doing the firing.
Right. Yes. And then we get upset when they mess with the program.
We get upset when they turn back and say, hey, why are we shooting at that hill? What's up there? We're not going to tell you, just shoot your damn thing. And if you don't like what happens, call us and we'll make it better. That's almost a literal quote from the piece.
Yes. So, okay. So if you scroll down, there's the next thing, an early proof of concept was a campaign against one of Russia's most feared battle groups, the 58th Combined Arms Army. This was in, I think, August of 2022, that summer, the first summer. In mid-2022, using American intelligence and targeting information, the Ukrainians unleashed a rocket barrage at the headquarters of the 58th in the Kherson region, killing generals and staff officers inside. Again and again, the group set up at another location. Each time, the Americans found it and the Ukrainians destroyed it. And that's the way we wanted it to go. Then they describe how there was contemporaneously, we were sending out a pre-dawn swarm of maritime drones with the support from the Central Intelligence Agency. I guess they weren't CIA drones exactly. I guess we just probably built them and drove them. I don't know, but whatever. They attacked the port of Sevastopol and damages several warships, which prompts the Russians to begin pulling back. And then now we get the but paragraph. Now this is where Eden begins to fall, folks. What is that? Is that Genesis 1:6, Walter? I forget where it is.
It happens amazingly quickly in the history of mankind that we fall from God's grace, and it happens amazingly quickly in the Ukraine war that things start getting complicated.
So, but ultimately the partnership strained and the arc of the war shifted amid rivalries, resentments, and diverging imperatives and agendas. The Ukrainians sometimes saw the Americans as overbearing and controlling, prototypical patronizing Americans. The Americans sometimes couldn't understand why the Ukrainians simply didn't accept good advice.
So stop there.
Mm-hmm.
I give a point to the Ukrainians here, because I don't think there's any better word for, listen, just shoot your howitzers now at this coordinate and than controlling. That is controlling.
Right? That seems like a pretty good operating definition of controlling, right?
Yeah.
So, note how he throws the Ukrainians a bone at the beginning of this passage. saying that they sometimes saw us as overbearing and controlling. But then after that, it's just all about how the Ukrainians suck. So where the Americans focused on measured, achievable objectives, they saw the Ukrainians as constantly grasping for the big win, the bright, shining prize. The Ukrainians, for their part, often saw the Americans as holding them back. Ukrainians aimed to win the war outright. Even as they shared that hope, the Americans wanted to make sure the Ukrainians didn't lose it.
Oh, I see. That was the goal. Well, back here in America, where we don't get to find out that we're at war with Russia and that we're directing the whole thing, and that someday we will actually be firing missiles into Russia, deep into Russia. It also seemed like the prize was a great shining victory. Did it not to you, Matt?
That's what they told us.
Were you ever told that we were merely trying to sort of stem the damage in Ukraine, that was our goal? I thought it was to, topple Putin, Slava Ukraine,
strike a blow against the forces of anti-democracy, right?
Gain back everything that had been lost, and so on. But now the New York Times tells us they were simply trying to put a Band-Aid on this terrible wound Ukraine had received.
And we'll get to all the things that people were saying during this time period in a second, because it's just mind blowing when you take it all in together. But then it starts to turn even more negative here. As the Ukrainians won greater autonomy in the partnership, I think that goes a little down. Yeah. They increasingly kept their intentions secret. They were perennially angered that the Americans couldn't or wouldn't give them all the weapons and other equipment that they wanted. The Americans, in turn, were angered by what they saw as the Ukrainians' unreasonable demands and by their reluctance to take politically risky steps to bolster their vastly outnumbered forces. So here we're being told everything, by the way, that the Trump supporters were saying about Zelensky when he came to visit, that the demands were unreasonable, that they were acting like they were bossing us around, that they were ungrateful, et cetera, except this is a far more serious thing, because it's the people who are partners with Zelensky betraying him and basically outing the fact that they themselves thought this during that time period. So
yeah,
then they come back.
When Mr. Zelensky sided with the subordinate, in other words, the Ukrainians poured vast complements of men and resources. In other words, and which then ends at the end of the paragraph in stillborn failure. So Zelensky siding with this unnamed subordinate is his first, is his first sin, meaning not siding with us.
Yeah, he listened to somebody else instead of us, and this led to the failed counteroffensive at Bakhmut, which is essentially like the anti-Tet offensive. It's the thing that doesn't work, and leaves it forever impossible to imagine.
Stillborn failure.
Right. And by the way, at the time, the Times told us something completely different. They said it was like an apparent loss, that the city's importance had been had been outsized, that it was largely of symbolic value. And here they tell us just flat out, it was a stillborn failure and it was really important. And then, so then it goes, now here's the key paragraph, I think, to me. This is the first big admission. The partnership operated in the shadow of deepest geopolitical fear that Mr. Putin
Are we there yet? Where are we?
Oh, sorry. It's the next paragraph.
There we go.
The partnership operated in the shadow of deepest geopolitical fear that Mr. Putin might see it as breaching a red line of military engagement and make good on his often brandished nuclear threats. The story of the partnership shows how close the Americans and their allies sometimes came to that red line, how increasingly dire events forced them, some said too slowly, to advance it to more perilous ground, and how they carefully devised protocols to remain on the safe side of it. So that last line is a lie. They repeatedly talk about how they went over the red lines over and over and over again. By the end, we're barely even paying attention to.
This is the paragraph. You're right, which is important for this reason. You almost had a nuclear war, America. You almost had a nuclear war in a war you didn't know you were fighting almost directly against Russia. And we were also quite aware that we were treading that line, that we were about to step on that trigger at any point. Now, in retrospect, it's pretty horrifying to realize that under a dementia patient, as a president, because that's also been one of the recent revelations, along with COVID, started in a lab, etc.
Right.
We went as directly against Russia and against their mainland as NATO or United States ever have. In fact, the only time we ever have. And we thought there was a risk of nuclear war, and we got right up to the edge. And maybe we should have gone a little further, or maybe we should have gotten up to that edge a little faster.
I mean, here they're saying, right? That's exactly what they're saying. And at the very beginning of the story, they're telling us that they were afraid that the existence of the partnership, just the partnership itself,
yes,
was potentially enough of a crossing of a red line, right, to maybe trigger a response, a nuclear response from Putin. And they were telling us something completely different at the time. We'll come to that in a second. But that is an unbelievable revelation, considering everything that we were told in the interim. So, okay, so they go on, and okay, let's come to the part that I think you noticed that is really funny. It's not funny; it's horrifying. But it's the one a paragraph that begins, "Would the precision targeting." Would the precision targeting honed against terrorist groups be effective in a conflict with one of the most powerful militaries in the world? Would Ukrainian artillerymen fire their howitzers without hesitation at coordinates sent by American officers in a headquarters 1,300 miles away? Would Ukrainian commanders, based on intelligence relayed by a disembodied American voice pleading, "There's nobody there, go," order infantrymen to enter a village behind enemy lines? The answers to those questions, in truth, the partnership's entire trajectory would hinge on how well American and Ukrainian officers would trust one another. Essentially, Walter, what was this? Let's find out?
Yes. Will troops run into fire at the behest of disembodied voices from 1,300 miles away? Let's find out.
I mean,
well, for America to find out, that's a very interesting kind of abstract rhetorical question. For a guy who's tired, smoking a cigarette, who hasn't eaten in 2 days in Ukraine, freezing his ass off at the front, running, let's find out, is a less abstract proposition. And for a commander who's saying, listen, I'm not really your commander, just do what the disembodied voice that I'm basically just passing on to you says, it's I would say an anguishing question to find out.
Absolutely.
Oh, wait. And what if the answer is, they just got blown up? Hey, disembodied voice, my guys all just got killed. Yeah. Well, that's interesting for us to find out. But they did run aggressively, right? None of them retreated, right? Nope, they didn't. They believed you. Well, we're going to keep that on file.
I mean, I'm imagining them speaking using a English-Ukrainian dictionary. It's like that Monty Python skit, oh, your guys died? My hovercraft is filled with eels.
In other words, this was some kind of Stanford prison experiment, right, done at scale. Will people run into withering machine gun fire based on a voice transmitted through their powerless commander? Let's find out.
Yeah, it's like a Star Trek episode, right?
Will people listen to an AI voice in their helmet say, I want you to step on the landmine? But it's a landmine. I want you to step on it.
It's unbelievable. Okay, so it goes on. If you scroll down, you'll see the next section is all about this. Essentially, they're bragging about how well it works. At first, it's this whole
building trust. Also, that they frame this as a trust issue. What it really is an override of your survival instinct issue. You might trust somebody who tells you to run over a hill into unknown territory where you happen to know there are enemy troops. You might trust them, but can you do it, man? Can you eat the worms?
That's right. That's right. You got to get right in there. But the trust is pierced, Walter. Why? Because the Ukrainians sank the Moskva. This huge symbol of Russian naval power. We didn't know they were doing it, and that freaked us out. That they threw us this curveball, and did something off script, and this was the beginning of the fracturing, essentially.
Matt, can we just stop and go to my my competency as a literary analyst?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's really important to understand how this thing is written in order to try to infer or deduce what it's actually saying. According to a former senior U.S. military officer, the Americans go, "Oh, that's the Moskva." The Ukrainians go, "Oh my God, thanks a lot. Bye." Do you think that happened in that way?
Not.
Do you think they spoke in that fashion where somebody goes, "Oh my God, I see, wait, I see the USS Missouri. Oh, gotta go." And then you go blow it up. Wow. In other words, they telescope what was a pretty fraught, I would imagine, set of decisions about blowing up one of Russia's biggest ships into, because though the Americans control every element of the Ukrainian armed forces at this point, including whether they run or stop or shoot their howitzers, the one thing they can't control is whether they blow up a ship.
That's right. That's right. Apparently, right?
Right.
And so this worries us. And
then we just go, and then they didn't let the Americans go, "Oh, that's the Moskva." The Ukrainians go, "Oh my God, thanks a lot, bye." The Americans go, "Oh shit, they just blew it up."
Yep. And it says for the Americans there was anger because the Ukrainians hadn't given so much as a heads up. Surprise
that you scrolling.
Yeah, you got to keep. I'm sorry, it's a little farther down. For the Americans there was anger. Because the Ukrainians hadn't given so much as a heads up. Surprised that Ukraine possessed missiles capable of reaching the ship in a panic because the Biden administration hadn't intended to enable the Ukrainians to attack such a potent symbol of Russian power. So again, this is
where did they get these missiles that we're so surprised they have that are capable of reaching the ship? Is that answered?
It's not.
In other words,
they're claiming, I guess, that it was Ukraine's own stock of missiles. I highly doubt that we didn't know exactly what they had.
In other words, hey, Russia, we didn't blow up your ship.
Exactly. Right?
And they had stuff we didn't know about.
We didn't know. It's like that Shaggy song, "It Wasn't Me." Yeah, right?
They didn't tell us. They had the stuff we didn't know about. It was a very brief conversation. "Oh, look, that's the Moskva. That's the last we heard of it." And then it blew up.
Remember that Lenny Bruce routine where, like, if your wife walks in and you having sex with somebody else, deny it, right? Like, exactly. Even if she's looking right at it, just deny it. So here we're saying essentially we didn't do this. But it's important that they're telling us that there was consternation, because this is the beginning of letting us into an internal thought process where the Americans in the last White House were secretly very concerned that they were crossing lines with the Russians that might provoke a response. And this is just the beginning of that story, and it quickly gets worse. Now they go into some background, and we can scroll to a brief comic interlude, the one that starts with "Further Complicating Matters." It's next to the map. Further Complicating Matters was this. So we're learning that the two of the main generals, Valery Zaluzhny from the Ukrainian side and Mark Milley from the American side.
The now pardoned Mark Milley, the now pardoned for we're still not sure what Mark Milley.
Well, now we're getting an idea over maybe what. So we're going to find out that they had a communications problem.
Breakdown.
So, yeah, right. Led Zeppelin. Further complicating matters was General Zaluzhny's testy relationship with his American counterpart. I wonder if he used that testy word on purpose just to give us a little testicular imagery there. General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In phone conversations, Milley might second-guess the Ukrainians' equipment requests. He might dispense battlefield advice based on satellite intelligence on the screen in his Pentagon office. Next would come an awkward silence before General Zaluzhny cut the conversation short. Sometimes he simply ignored the Americans' calls.
Those mischievous, bad, ignorant Ukrainians, not now, because the Stanford prison experiment is now, fully in force, and we're finding out that sometimes they won't do what we tell them to from our video screen in the Pentagon. How dare they? Right,
exactly. How can they possibly allow that?
And sometimes they hang up on us, and we just had an instance of that where they said, "Hey, there's the Moskva," and hung up on us before we could say, "Hey, don't blow that up, man."
Right, exactly. They just went ahead and did it. And Walter, I mean, do you want to read this, because this it's almost too comic?
Okay, this is my favorite paragraph in the piece, not for the information that it explicitly gives us, but for some of the comic elements that are completely ignored by the writer himself, apparently.
Right.
Who doesn't crack up at his own details. To keep them talking, the Pentagon initiated an elaborate telephone tree. Now imagine that this is the actual way that the communications between the Ukrainians and the Americans happened. Just picture this literally, okay? To keep them talking, the Pentagon initiated an elaborate telephone tree. A Milley aide would call Major General David S. Baldwin, commander of the California National Guard, who would ring a wealthy Los Angeles blimp maker named Igor Pasternak.
Can we see the picture? I'm sorry, Mr. Producer. Can we show the picture of Igor Pasternak, blimp maker? I just sent it. It's a separate one. Let's scroll down.
There he is.
There he is, Igor Pasternak, blimp maker.
Not with a military haircut, right?
Right. Yes.
The wealthy Los Angeles blimp maker looks somebody who produced Snow White, not like somebody who is in the middle of an elaborate telephone tree linking the armed forces of Ukraine and the United States. It's like everybody had to triangulate through David Geffen to run this war.
David Geffen with a blimp.
But let's get back to the action.
I'm sorry. If we can go back to the other story. I'm sorry.
Yeah. There he is with one of his blimps. And by the way, did you know that blimps were quite as big a thing these days as apparently they are? Let's look into that later. But anyway, a wealthy Los Angeles blimp maker named Igor Pasternak, who had grown up in Lviv with Alexei Reznikov, then Ukraine's defense minister. Mr. Reznikov would track down General Zaluzhny and tell him, according to General Baldwin, "I know you're mad at Milley, but you have to call him." So in other words, this is like my wife and I had a fight, and I'm living in a motel and she's in had gotten an apartment in New York, and we have to go through, and in order to get a phone call through her, have to call somebody who she went to high school with, who then calls her and says, hey, listen, Amanda, you got to talk to Walter. I know you're pissed. And she sometimes goes, oh, okay. Like, this isn't exactly the hotline, in other words.
Yeah, it's not exactly the bat phone. Nothing important hinges on this except for the safety of the entire human race.
And to what I want to say to all this, in your complicated telephone tree between the distrustful Ukrainians and the, just wanting to do the right thing Americans, what if blimp maker Igor Pasternak is stoned or hanging out at his pool with, some lovely young starlets from Los Angeles? The whole thing breaks down. I mean, dude, Stanley Kubrick could not have imagined that in the middle of the Russian-American, negotiations or talks over these rogue nuclear bombers and Dr. Strangelove, you had to go through a blimp maker in LA.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable that Entis doesn't pause to do something with the humor of that line. I mean, the qualifications of that blimp maker is that he went to school with the guy in Russia. Right.
Not that he has military clearances or anything. I mean, in other words, future intelligence agents of the world, if you can get in with the equivalent of the blimp maker, who's the only trusted go-between, you can find out everything about the process of, quasi World War III. Like, in other words, that the blimp maker's girlfriend was at that point possibly the most powerful agent in the world.
And I mean, this is like how you get a part in a Tarantino movie. It's not how you direct a major shooting war in which nearly 1 million people die. And also, just the fact that there's a blimp in the middle of this. I mean, it's
the word blimp.
It's straight out of Naked Gun. Remember when Leslie Nielsen is like, it's the same old story. Boy meets girl. Girl and boy get married. Girl dies in tragic blimp accident. Like it's just automatically funny. But they don't do anything with it because, of course, they don't. Anyway,
I know you're mad at Millie, but you have to call him. Basically, this war was junior high.
Right, it's Heather's.
It was all relayed through a high school friend who had to convince another guy not to be mad in order to talk to the Americans. This is like if I said, hey, Matt, hang on a sec. I got to take a call. And then I explained after the show, Matt, I went to high school with this American general. And every time they want to have a troop movement or something over in some war, the two commanders don't trust each other. So I'm the go-between. Just hang on for 5 minutes.
It's just unbelievable. All right, there's so much stuff here. There's
ragtag alliance. I like the word that after that paragraph they threw in the word ragtag alliance. Yeah, that's pretty ragtag, all right.
Totally. Okay, let's scroll down quickly. So to soon the Ukrainians, if we can get to that. This is just crazy because it gives you an insight into how crazy these people are. Soon the Ukrainians, nearly 20 in all, began arriving in Wiesbaden. Every morning, officers recalled the Ukrainians and Americans gathered to survey Russian weapon systems and determine the ripest, highest value targets. The priority lists were then handed over to the Intelligence Fusion Center, where officers analyzed streams of data to pinpoint the target's locations. Inside the U.S. European Command, this process gave rise to a fine but fraught linguistic debate. Given the delicacy of the mission, was it unduly provocative to call targets? Some officers thought targets was appropriate. Others called them intel tippers because the Russians were often moving and the information would need verification on the ground. And this is amazing. It's amazing that they told this to a reporter thinking that this was clever. The debate was settled by Major General Timothy D. Brown, European Command's intelligence chief. The locations of Russian forces would be, quote, points of interest. Intelligence on airborne threats would be, quote, tracks of interest. Then there's another line. If you ever get asked the question, did you pass a target to the Ukrainians? You can legitimately not be lying when you say, no, I did not. One U.S. official explained. So in other words, if you call
targets crocodiles, and somebody says, "Did you give them a target?" You go, "No, I gave them a crocodile."
Right. What is this, junior high? Are you kidding me? And what's ridiculous about this is that they're talking about this in the context of their own concern over whether or not targeting the Russians would piss them off enough to attack us.
And no, it won't. Let's not worry about the actual lobbing of missiles that blow up at people causing nuclear war. But if they ever catch us using the word targets, that might lead to World War III. Dude, this is another Kubrick moment. This is like, Peter Sellers as the president turns to George C. Scott as the leading war planner and says, General, what if the Russians find out that we're shooting missiles at them? And George C. Scott goes, President, let's not call them missiles. Let's call them cigars. We're shooting cigars at them. Tell them that. Tell Andre we're shooting cigars.
They're
and you won't be lying. That's a good solution to the problem.
So from there, Entus follows the rules. His next paragraph
starts calling everything points of interest for the rest of the article.
Each point of interest would have to adhere to intelligence sharing rules crafted to blunt the risk of Russian retaliation. There would be no points of interest on Russian soil. Quote, our message to Russians was this war should be fought inside Ukraine, a senior U.S. official said. Then they go on, and in case you were worried that they said something stupid by accident, they reassure you that no, they said something stupid completely intentionally. So if we go down, the White House also prohibited sharing intelligence on the locations of strategic Russian leaders, like the Armed Forces Chief, General Valery Gerasimov. Imagine how that would be for us if we knew that the Russians helped some other country assassinate our chairman, another senior U.S. official said. Like, we'd go to war.
And the Russians go, and we go, and we'd go to war. Like, are we led by Sean Penn in one of his early teen movies?
Yeah, this is from Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
We'd go to war if they were going to shoot you, man. You're right.
So, Mr. Hand, we would totally go to war. We're gonna go off and do our own cool rules. Jeff Spicoli fights the Russian.
And so, what's the solution to this problem, Matt?
So the solution is don't worry about it. And they put it into baskets. And the way the system works, the task force dragon would tell the Ukrainians where Russians were positioned, but to protect intelligence sources and methods from Russian spies, and apparently not the readers of the New York Times, it would not say how it knew what it knew. All the Ukrainians would see on a secure cloud.
On a secure cloud. Hey, man, we know we're telling you what to do, and we're not telling you why we want you to do it or why you should, but it's on a secure cloud, okay?
Right, yes. And he by the way, they neglect to mention that their intelligence was penetrated during this exact time by some guys in a Discord room.
Secure clouds were chains of coordinates divided into baskets.
Priority 1, priority 2, and so on. As General Zabrodsky remembers, remembers it. When the Ukrainians asked why they should trust the intelligence, General Donahue would say, "Don't worry about how we found out. Just trust when you shoot it, it will hit it, and you'll like the results. And if you don't like the results, tell us. We'll make it better." So
What?
just do it. Don't
So
ask
in
why.
other words, if you shoot on our inexplicable command something and it causes withering fire to return and kill all your men and you don't like it, just give us a call and we'll try to do better next time. But don't ask us in the future or get mad at us in the past for not explaining things.
It's unbelievable.
And then the Ukrainians, it happens again, and they go, "Hey man, you said you'd make it better, but this time when we shot where you said to shoot and didn't tell us why, a drone came over and took out everybody behind us. Well, we'll try to make it better. Do this. Well, it didn't work this time either. Well, just stick with it, man." So you're saying we have a chance.
Right, exactly. So, all right, and then this leads there's developments, and then it comes to the moment, the line that I think should be quoted from this piece. Let's just go down to the ensuing debate, if we could.
Note that though Walter and Matt are laughing at the farcical Kubrickian nature of this beyond communications breakdown, Adam Entis, the author of the piece, is going on without irony.
Oh, I know.
Without any sense of the absolute giant farce at the edge of World War III that he is describing.
I mean, he's essentially written the greatest screenplay of all time. It just needs to be tweaked a little bit.
Without knowing it.
Right, without knowing it, yeah.
Because for him, we're going to find out the moral of all this was Ukrainians weren't the completely unquestioning tools that we needed them to be, and therefore we can't help them anymore.
So now we have problems. The problems is we start by giving them these howitzers that have a 15-mile range. They do great damage in the beginning. They figure out a way to trick the Russians into lighting up their, most valuable assets, and then we just bomb the crap out of them. But then the Russians catch on to the fact that these howitzers have 15-mile range, so they move everything 15 miles away.
So the Russians, those wily Russians, who learn slowly, do something almost unheard of in the history of warfare. As we bring more powerful and longer range weapons into the field, they move back out of range each time. We start with 15-mile howitzers. We move to 90-mile HIMARS or whatever. And finally, we're at ATACMS.
Yes. But
because they have the sense to move back when they're within range of our stuff.
So the first key moment comes when we bring in the HIMARS missiles, the high mobility artillery rocket systems known as HIMARS, which use satellite guided rockets to execute strikes up to 50 miles away. So now we're going to get them at 50 miles. Here we come. The ensuing debate reflected the Americans' evolving thinking. Pentagon officials were resistant, loath to deplete the Army's limited HIMARS stocks. First of all, what? But whatever. Okay.
What were you going to say, Matt?
Like, they get on the Ukrainians' case later for not being willing to sacrifice their 18-year-old kids. But we're not willing to part with our HIMARS stocks.
But then we do.
Yeah. But in May, General Cavoli visited Washington and made the case that ultimately won them over. Celeste Wallander, the Assistant Defense Secretary for International Security Affairs, recalled, "Milley would always say, you've got a little Russian army fighting a big Russian army, and they're fighting the same way, and Ukrainians will never win."
Okay, stop right there. That's what Walter always said, too.
That's right.
That's what the guys over at the Mint Bar who are in the Montana National Guard, who are 24, always used to say too. Ukraine has a little country with a few people, and Russia is a big country with a lot of people. and Ukrainians are probably going to lose. Millie, being a man who's, elevated himself to the rank of general, says exactly what they say in the Mint Bar, but they convince him otherwise.
They convince him otherwise. Yes. Her argument was Cavoli's argument, she said, was that with HIMARS they can fight like we can, and that's how they will start to beat the Russians. So
that's not even an argument. That's just an assertion.
It's absurd. It's an absurdity. So now we come to the. I'm sorry. I know I said the other one was the paragraph. To me, this is the paragraph because it says the magic word in it. The next paragraph, if we could. Oh, and we have to let our producer go. So I'll do this from now on. But at the White House, Mr. Biden and his advisors weighed that argument against fears that pushing the Russians would only lead Mr. Putin to panic and widen the war. When the generals requested HIMARS, one official recalled, the moment felt like standing on that line, wondering, if you take a step forward, is World War III going to break out? And when the White House took that step forward, the official said, Task Force Dragon was becoming the entire back office of the war. So this might be a good moment to go back and look at what, for instance, Joe Biden was saying at the time.
Where are we? Because one thing that this article does a wonderful job of kind of obscuring is how long into the war was this? Where were we? What, how long did we have to go? So at this critical point, where are we in the timeline?
So the HIMARS thing, if I'm not mistaken, is in June of. Hang on a sec. I think it might even be the first. I think it might have been 2023, but hang on a second. No, 2022. So
realize the war hasn't been going on for that long when we reach this point.
Yes, exactly. And so what were we saying? So this is what Biden said in April of 2022. Let's look at number 20, if we could. He gets asked a question in a press conference, like basically, are we in a proxy war? And hold on a second. Oh, it's got to be me. Hang on a minute. And essentially says, no, we are not. So hold on. Here we go. Sorry, folks. We let our producer go. So hang on a second. All right. So
shall I sing a song?
No, okay. We're good. We got it.
This is okay. Remember when the war started?
Yep.
Making idle comments about the use of nuclear weapons or the possibility of the need to use that. It's irresponsible.
Mr. President, on that, Mr. President, back on the border, Title 42, a number of your Democratic friends are pressuring the White House to maintain that policy.
Wait, I'm going to back up a little bit. Here we go.
Mr. President, thank you. How worried are you by growing number of Russian comments in the media and on some of their officials painting this conflict as actually already a conflict between NATO, the US, and Russia? They're painting in very alarmist terms, talking of nuclear weapons, saying it's a life or death struggle, etc. And just separately, connected to that, Lavrov himself says it's already a proxy war, not a direct war, but a proxy war. So are either of those two things true, and do they worry you, those things?
They're not true. They do concern me because it shows the desperation that Russia is feeling about their abject failure.
He's lying.
To be able to do what they set out to do in the first.
He's lying through his teeth about nuclear war, which they're already concerned about behind the scenes.
Not of the truth, but of their failure. And so instead of saying that the Ukrainians equipped with some capability to resist Russian forces are doing this, they've got to tell their people the United States and all of NATO is
you're lying.
It's taking out Russian troops and tanks, etc. So it's number one, it's an excuse for their failure, but number two, it's also, if they really mean it, no one should be making idle comments about the use of nuclear weapons or the possibility of the need to use that.
You see what he did there? Like he almost said, if they really mean it, like, you know, they're hypersensitive or something like that. And then he had to pull back and say, no one should be making idle comments about nuclear war right now.
But now we know they're already super concerned about it.
Yep.
We know at this point that America's big problem is that not only is it a proxy war, but our proxies aren't listening closely enough.
Right.
So
Right.
that's the reality going on behind this, behind the scrim, behind the curtain there. And that right there is the commander in chief of this almost, you know, of this brinksmanship style direct confrontation between the two biggest nuclear superpowers in the world. That's the man in charge right there. Or is he in charge? Because, Matt, only in the last paragraph did you read was the name Biden even mentioned.
Right. Yeah. They rarely bring him up. They often substitute the White House.
Yes.
In the piece. And look.
Question is, standing at that lectern, did he know what the hell was going on or not?
Well, I think he had to have at that moment, but either way, look, I just want to show this. This is from even earlier. This is in March, just right after the invasion. But this is what their position was about the whole idea of World War III at the time, publicly.
Ha ha ha.
Oops, sorry. Sorry.
And I want to be clear, though. We're going to make sure Ukraine has the weapons to defend themselves from invading Russian force. And we will send money and food aid to save Ukrainian lives.
Food.
We welcome Ukrainian refugees with open arms if, in fact, they come
Food.
all the way here. And as we provide this support to Ukraine, we're going to continue to stand together with our allies in Europe and send an unmistakable message that we will defend every inch of NATO territory, every single inch. Okay. United, galvanized.
This is Al Pacino's speech from Any Given Sunday.
Over 12,000 American forces along the borders with Russia, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Romania, etc. Because they move once. Granted, if we respond, it is World War III, but we have a sacred obligation on NATO territory, a sacred obligation, Article 5. And we will not, although we will not fight the Third World War in Ukraine. Putin's war against Ukraine was never be a victory. Democrats are rising to meet the moment, relying.
Democrats. This was a war of the Democratic Party, not even the United States.
We'll never falter. But look, the idea that we're going to send in offensive equipment and have planes and tanks and trains going in with American pilots and American crews, just understand, and don't kid yourself, no matter what you all say, that's called World War III.
And we're about to do it, despite me saying 3 times that we haven't. In fact, we already have, okay?
So he just basically, so they articulate this this idea that that basically it can't be World War III because we're not sending in American troops and American piloted weapons to do this. That would be World War III if we did that. We are not going to fight World War III in Ukraine because what we're doing there is not World War III. But meanwhile, behind the scenes, we're learning they're terrified that they're doing the same thing. I mean, it was
meanwhile, behind the scenes, we have summoned them to Wiesbaden and set up a fusion headquarters where General Milley from his freaking laptop controls every major exchange of fire. What? You freaking lying pieces of whatever. Matt, here's a question about this whole piece. Somebody said, did Biden know? You said, I think he must have known. But I'm looking at a guy who I don't think understands what kind of war he's running at all.
Well, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that. I mean, it seems like an exercise in mass self-deception where they're telling themselves, as long as they think they don't cross some technical line, that'll be okay, that the Russians will accept that, and therefore it won't happen or something. I mean, is that where they were mentally during this whole time? I can't really.
Well, but what I'm saying is that the notion that Biden can be so I know he's a good liar. I mean, I know they all are, but that he can be so emphatically wrong, emphatically deceptive, suggests to me that the best way to assure that those performances of his are convincing is not to tell him the damn truth.
I mean,
where is Jake Sullivan's name? Where is Antony Blinken's name so far? Where is, the name of everyone except Milley, who's saying, I don't know, there's a lot of Russians and there's very few Ukrainians. They'll probably lose. And then somebody named Wolenda comes in and says, but if they have HIMARS, they'll be just as powerful as us and just as agile as us. Okay, you're right. Let's do it.
It's incredible. So in the first year of the war, things are going relatively well for the American-backed Ukrainian forces, and at one point they even have a chance of threatening Crimea. And
okay, by the way, Matt, please. This
paragraph. I don't take that for granted as though it's true. I'm just saying that's how it's recounted.
Right, but we keep saying, this is the paragraph because each one is more breathtakingly absurd and terrifying and revealing than the last, though Adam Entus in his spectrumish way just marches on, laying one brick after another of unconscionable revelation. But here's the one I love. Until that moment, U.S. intelligence agencies had estimated the chance of Russia's using nuclear weapons at 5 to 10%. What?
That's it.
Listen, man, if somebody says here's a lottery you can play, Walt, and your chances of winning are 5 to 10%. Your chances of winning $10 million are 5 to 10%. I'm like, give me a freaking ticket.
I would pay 1,000 times the cost of that ticket.
Give me 1,000 tickets.
Yeah, exactly.
But we were just at a certain point that year at a 10% risk of nuclear war, and they thought that was cool.
I mean,
but now it was up to 50. Dude, 50% is called a coin flip, okay?
Right.
50% is called heads or tails.
Right.
We got to the heads or tails level of nuclear war at that point, and Biden's out front saying, can't even talk about it. It's irresponsible. What? I have never been gladder in my life that Donald Trump won the presidency, to be honest with you. I would rather Jill Stein win the presidency or anybody, my next door neighbor, than these folks who brought us to the 50% chance of nuclear war. Oh, I know, in Ukraine. It would have stayed there, right?
Right. I mean, they recount this story as if it's not shocking.
Dude, what was the highest percent we were at in the Cuban Missile Crisis, do you think?
I don't think it was this high. Remember the same people who did the atomic clock or whatever it was,
right?
When they assessed the Cuban Missile Crisis at that time, it wasn't as high as it was during this period.
Meanwhile, America's just hoody-doing along with a 50% of a nuclear war. Oh, maybe a limited one going on.
So the 2023 starts. They're doing great. They think a counteroffensive, one big counteroffensive, is going to be the last. The Americans were preaching a strategy centered around the city of Melitopol to strangle Russian forces in Crimea, and their idea was to basically break the Russian lines and go through into Crimea. But the Ukrainians had a different idea. They wanted to do basically a three-headed attack.
Those kids.
Yeah.
We've got the Americans who want measurable, achievable, rational objectives, but those hot-headed Ukrainians want to win.
So they end up doing doing this three-headed the secondary offensive, and it's focused on Bakhmut, which with a feint towards the Luhansk region, and it ends up not working, and this forces the Americans to take increasingly bigger and bigger gambles, and it leads to us deploying the weapons that we don't want to deploy, and right. So
that we can't afford to run out of.
Right, exactly. So the previous year,
this Walenda, whose name lives in infamy and would be more pissed than anyone, I think, at reading this article, because they got the whole blame for escalating to the HIMARS level.
Right, exactly. I mean, think about what this says to future American allies, right? I mean, look, I know Donald Trump, other people who other countries that might be thinking about going into business with us for any kinds of reasons, they might be reconsidering that now for other reasons. But this is an unbelievable betrayal of a military ally, right? To not only spill all these secrets, but to blame them for failure, right?
You guys, we said you were subs. That means submissive. That means do what mistress tells you. Lick the boot. You
exactly.
Didn't lick it hard enough.
Smell the glove, right?
Smell the glove. Love the glove. You guys, didn't we tell you?
So the previous year, the Russians had unwisely placed command posts, ammunition depots, and logistics centers within 50 miles of the front lines. But new intelligence showed that the Russians had now moved critical installations beyond HIMARS' reach. So Generals Kavoly and Aguto recommended the next quantum leap, giving the Ukrainians Army tactical missile systems, missiles known as ATACMS, that can travel up to 190 miles to make it harder for Russian forces in Crimea to help defend Melitopol.
Isn't ATACMS a snack food? Why did we name,
Steak-em, right?
Yeah, Steak-ems.
Does anyone have a picture of a Steak-em? I'll post it. They're an amazingly well, people have divided opinions about Steak-em. I like Steak-ems. ATACMS were a particularly sore subject. Russia's military chief, General Gerasimov, had indirectly referred to them the previous May when he warned General Milley that anything that flew 190 miles would be breaching a red line. There was also a question of supply. The Pentagon was already warning that it would not have enough ATACMS if America had to fight its own war.
Stop for a second.
Mm-hmm.
What is America having to fight its own war refer to? China?
I mean, I guess, right?
America had to fight its own war. Well, so we're already fighting this one against the Russians. What one would that be?
Yeah, against what
would that other one be?
Well, yeah, as if this is a secondary minor war against the biggest nuclear power in the world. But we're worried about some other theoretical war. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Anyway,
the Ukrainians screw up again is the summary of that chapter, right?
Yes, they screw up again, and then here's this amazing passage. It was like watching the demise of the Melitopol offensive even before it was launched. One Ukrainian official remarked, 15 months into the war, it had all come to this tipping point. We should have walked away, said a senior American official, but they would not.
Okay, stop. Why didn't that senior American official want to get quoted?
Because that's what he'd be called a Trumpist within 10 seconons, right?
Or he doesn't exist,
or he doesn't
lying.
Exist, or he's lying. Yes, that's true too. I mean, there are a lot of people. There are some conspicuous lines in here talking about how, it wasn't the general's fault. Like things were done over the recommendations of the generals.
And who was that senior American official? Let's just guess, saying that person exists.
I mean,
Jake Sullivan. That's my guess. Whoever has preserved the right to come out later and link back to this article and say, actually, it was me who said we could never win. Because this is somebody who's preserving their office for a future career and wants to be known as the one who warned and wasn't listened to. Maybe it was Milley himself who'd already said, Russia big, Ukraine small, Russia probably win.
I mean, so whenever you get to mysteries like that in stories like this, I always sort of go back to whoever the quoted person is.
Right.
Few, right?
It's the last quoted person.
Yeah.
Or
exactly.
the next one.
Yeah. So then there's more, stuff. The Ukrainians are asking for 5 million shells and 1 million drones.
Dude, maybe it was Kamala Harris, so that she can say when she runs next time that I walked in the room, I heard all this talk about war, and I said, we should just stop.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I don't think that.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to find this thing here. Okay. And then
the red lines kept moving.
Yeah, the red lines kept moving. So he keeps talking about this. The red lines keep moving. There were the
by themselves. We didn't move them.
Yeah. With the ATACMS arrived early in spring. Then there were the SMEs, the subject matter experts, so as not to evoke memories of the American military advisors sent to South Vietnam in the slide to full-scale war. They would be known as subject matter experts. So we didn't call them military advisors. We called them SMEs.
So once again, listeners to America This Week, remember this. When you're changing the language to obscure terrible realities, you're losing.
Yeah.
Or you're led by fools or cowards or strange bureaucratic psychopaths who think that language is reality. And if you just change it, you change reality.
I mean, I don't even know what they think that this is, again, who tells that to a reporter thinking that that's going to be smart? I just
this
don't
isn't
get it.
Like Vietnam because we changed some wording.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They're not advisors. They're subject matter experts, like academics almost.
They're researchers.
Right.
We sent researchers to Ukraine.
So here we go. Perhaps the hardest red line, though, was the Russian border. Soon that line, too,
especially for the Russians.
Right, exactly. Soon that line, too, would be withdrawn. So the Ukrainians believed that the Russians hoped to reach a major road ringing Kharkov, which would allow them to bombard the city, the country's second largest, with artillery fire and threaten the lives of more than 1 million people. And now here's more ass covering. The Russian offensive exposed a fundamental asymmetry. The Russians could support their troops with artillery from just across the border. The Ukrainians couldn't shoot back using American equipment or intelligence because of that pesky problem of us not wanting to get into a shooting war on Russian territory.
Wow, they just thought of that at this point in the war. Like, hey, guys, I just figured out a problem. They can do anything they want to us and not start World War III because they're just fighting in Ukraine. We can't do everything we want to them because this is the U.S. fighting a proxy war against Russia. Oh, well, maybe you shouldn't have started a war that you can't afford to start winning.
Right, exactly.
Because the big lesson of this is the thing that we were really afraid of doing in Ukraine was start winning, because that might cause World War III.
I mean, did these people never play chess before in their lives? Like, if we win, if X then Y, like if things go well, we are eventually going to have to do this. And if we can't do this, then we are going to be stuck forever. So my guess is that they always knew that they were going to reach this point, and they just hoped to. Of
course they did.
Yeah. So, then we get into this crazy rationalization. This became the moment the Biden administration changed the rules of the game. Generals Cavoli and Agudo were tasked with creating an ops box, a zone on Russian soil in which Ukrainians could fire U.S.-supplied weapons, and Wiesbaden could support their strikes. So, essentially, they're saying we're going to create like an area in which you can do the bad thing, right?
In which you can shoot stuff into Russia.
Yes. So
with our help.
Yeah. So it is encompassing an area almost as large as New Jersey. The CIA was also
just a box, though, man.
It's just a box.
It's an
ops box.
The size of New Jersey. Another,
it's another Kubrickism, right?
Yeah, flash to the war in Kubrick. Let's blast their asses off. Okay. The president, paid by Peter Sellers, says, but then we'll be at war with them. Let's make a special place where we blast their asses off from and say that it's not real. It's just a box. It's just an ops box. They can't fight back against us because we only shot. They can't go against the whole United States because we just shot them from this ops box.
We were fighting fair in the ops box.
If it comes from the ops box, you're not allowed to respond with nuclear weapons, okay? That's the rule that we just set for you, Russia.
I mean, does everybody, is everybody listening? Are you finding this as insane as we are? I mean,
I think even if we've lost people, we are creating a historical document, so I don't give a damn.
Yeah. And, like the area as large as New Jersey, that just reminds me of like, didn't David Letterman, wasn't he fired as a weatherman once for predicting hailstones the size of canned hams? It seems like a joke, as an area as large as New Jersey. So the box goes live. Oh, by the way, the CIA was also authorized to send officers to the Kharkiv region to assist their Ukrainian counterparts with operations inside the box. Now, this is an important detail because earlier, Walter, we were told that the Ukrainians freelancing forced us to send people to Ukraine to watch them so that they didn't do shit that would piss off the Russians enough to want to start a nuclear war. So now we're sending CIA officers to this operation in the ops box. Anyway.
Was the box a square?
I don't know. I would love to know. I would love to know what exactly.
Okay, anyway. The box went live at the end of May.
The Russians were caught unawares with Wiesbaden's points of interests and coordinates, as well as Ukrainians' own intelligence. HIMARS strikes into the ops box helped defend Kharkiv. The Russians suffered some of their heaviest casualties of the war. The unthinkable had become real. The United States was now woven into the killing of Russian soldiers on sovereign Russian soil. And remember, they had told us...
Unthinkable.
Yeah, the unthinkable.
Is that called mission creep? Didn't that used to be called mission creep? Didn't mission creep used to be one of the chief risks of war? That the unthinkable becomes the thinkable, becomes the doable, becomes what you're actually doing? Well, how shocking.
Right. I'm shocked. We're Claude Rains now, right?
Right.
So then now there's more ass covering where they tell us that those pesky Ukrainians just do stuff without letting us know. At moments like these, Biden administration officials would joke bitterly. Here's some levity for you. Joke bitterly that they knew more about what the Russians were planning by spying on them than about what their Ukrainian partners were planning. To the Ukrainians, though, don't ask, don't tell was better than ask and stop.
Here's another divergence of incentives that Walter Kern and the National Guard guys at the Mint Bar could have anticipated. That the people on the ground fighting and dying would be a little bit more gung-ho than the people sitting back in Washington. In other words, they can run a video game from the Pentagon on Milley's laptop, but the people on the ground are going to get actually pissed off when they see the guy next to him die.
Yeah, you would think, right?
There's a little bit of different, existential experience of war going on there, and communicating between those two parties is probably going to be a fraught proposition.
James Benkard is exactly right. The Americans are like someone who plies a friend with drinks at a bar, encourages him to fight, then watches it.
And then blames him for taking a punch. Wait, dude, you're gonna make that dude mad.
Right.
He's 300 pounds and you're 120.
Right. He might look at me after that. What's the matter with you?
Just so you don't fight him so hard that he comes after me. Okay, here's your drink.
So on August 10th, the CIA station chief left too for a job at headquarters. In the churn of command, so it's, this is a mistakes were made kind of paragraph. In the churn of command, General Syrski made his move, sending troops across the southwest Russian border into the region of Kursk. For the Americans, the incursion's unfolding was a significant breach of trust. It wasn't just that the Ukrainians that again kept them in the dark. They had secretly crossed a mutually agreed upon line, taking coalition-supplied equipment into Russian territory encompassed by the ops box in violation of rules laid down when it was established.
Okay, let's stop for a second.
Wait, just quickly.
Okay.
The box had been established to prevent a humanitarian disaster in Kharkov, not so that the Ukrainians could take advantage to seize Russian soil. It wasn't almost
those
blackmail.
Ukrainians wanting to win again.
It wasn't almost blackmail. It was blackmail. And the Americans could have pulled the plug, but they didn't do it. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Let's pause, because this has been a very close reading of a long article.
I know people are,
and it was a long war. But let's close and summarize a couple of things thus far. The Americans had such great intelligence that they were able to direct Ukrainian weapons from 1,300 miles away and confidently tell them what to do. But the one thing we didn't have intelligence on, we're to believe, was what the Ukrainians were doing. We knew every Russian group of 5 to 10 and what hilltop they were on, but we were in the dark about the Ukrainians. Well, if that's true, that's a major fucking problem from early on. And I have a hard time believing it's true.
I don't believe it's true. Do you?
Everything that went wrong is the Ukrainians' fault, because we couldn't tell what was going on with them, even though we had perfect intelligence on the Russians. And everything that went well was our doing. That's what this article says.
And I'm sorry, if your partner blackmails you into a conflict with a nuclear power that you don't want to fight, and crosses into Kursk. By the way, Kursk is close as fuck to Moscow. It's like 320 miles or something like that. It's like the driving from Columbia, South Carolina to DC. That's how far away it is from Moscow. You can make that. I haven't done that drive exactly, but it's a short drive. So for Ukrainian troops to come over the border, but for it to be revealed that there's coalition material with those troops coming across the border, there would be a great shitting of pants all over Russia about that. This is in a country that's been invaded multiple times. That they're going to have a major sense of humor failure about this, right? And we had to know this, and so they this blackmail. How do we respond to that? We don't. We just let it keep going on.
Well, we could have pulled the plug on the ops box.
Yes, but now we give a humanitarian reason. We say that, it would lead to a catastrophe. Ukrainian soldiers in Kursk could perish unprotected by HIMARS rockets and U.S. intelligence. So, and now here we go. Here's another major lie. Kursk, the Americans concluded, was the win Mr. Zelensky had been hinting at all along. It was also evidence of his calculations. He still spoke of total victory, but one of the operation's goals, he explained to the Americans, was leverage, to capture and hold Russian land that could be traded for Ukrainian land in future negotiations. So as it was being represented to us that they were fighting to try to win the war, this incursion into Kursk, they were already thinking about negotiations, which we were told was treasonous to even talk about.
Oh,
at
Matt,
the time.
if you talked about it over here, Matt, you were a Putin lover. You were, Neville Chamberlain. You were an appeaser. You were an enemy of America.
Exactly. So to Adek's question, why this article? Now that's a very good question, right? I mean, there's a lot of reasons.
We will answer that presently. And
Yeah.
I know we've tried everyone's patience.
I know. So there's one last thing to get to here, which is after going across towards the Crimea, that was another red line. We prohibited the Russians to target.
Then we
it.
did something called lunar hail.
Right, that goes
which was
on
shooting,
for a while.
which was shooting ATACMS into Russia. Lunar hail.
And this is the humble brag here. We talk about this thing that we blew up.
We blew up something really cool along the way.
We blew up something really cool along the way, and
then suddenly Lloyd Austin becomes the star of the piece for some reason.
Yeah, so I guess there's two things we got to get to. All right, so this is Lloyd Austin took a surprise visit to Ukraine, I believe, just like in October of last year. Mr. Austin would later recount how he contemplated this manpower mismatch as he looked out the window of his armored SUV snaking through the Kiev streets. He was struck, he told aides, by the sight of so many men in their 20s, almost none of them in uniform. In a nation at war, he explained, men this age are usually away in the fight. This was what.
Maybe we should have visited the country that we're fighting a proxy war at the verge of World War III with before.
Before we got to this crazy point, we should have known.
And looked out the window of our cars to see that all the people who should be at the front are partying at the disco.
I mean, look, they lost a lot of people, but the point is well taken, right? I mean, the fact that Austin is seeing this for the first time is incredible. So Austin pressed Mr. Zelensky to take the bigger, bolder step and begin drafting 18-year-olds, to which Mr. Zelensky shot back, according to an official who was present. Why would I draft more people? We don't have any equipment to give them. And your generals are reporting that your units are undermanned, the official recalled Mr. Austin responding. They don't have enough soldiers for the equipment they have. That was the perennial standoff. So
wait a second, dude. Weren't we told earlier that the perennial go back a sec. The perennial standoff was this. Now, according to this War and Peace length article, which we've already had 4 analyses of what the problem was. Here's the new what the problem was the whole time statement. In the Ukrainians' view, the Americans weren't willing to do what was necessary to help them prevail. Okay. But they stuck with us, hoping that we would, right?
Mm-hmm.
Convincing us to cross more red lines and so on. In the Americans' view, the Ukrainians weren't willing to do what was necessary to help themselves prevail. Wait a second. Weren't we just told that the problem with the Ukrainians, weren't we told multiple times, was that they were too gung-ho and that they wanted to win and so on? This is the very first time in the article, and it's referring to something a visit toward the end of the war, that we had been telling them all along they weren't doing enough. That wasn't referred to once in this long narrative until now. In fact, what we're just been told is that Lloyd Austin, looking out a window right before the last election or something,
right,
figured out that, hey, they weren't drafting young guys.
And think about think about how Zelensky has been so bulletproof in the press all this time. And suddenly, now that they're no longer in office, now that they're no longer captaining this catastrophe, now they come out to the New York Times and they say Zelensky wouldn't send his 18-year-olds to go fight. Fuck him.
Because he needed them as breeding stock. Mr. Zelensky often said in response to the draft question that his country was fighting for its future. And 18 to 25-year-olds were the fathers of that future. Okay, stop for a minute. Zelensky wanted to retain enough young men to actually have babies and repopulate Ukraine and populate Ukraine after they'd killed all the over 25ers, or a lot of them. That means that we were at a war which was so demographically sensitive, according to Ukraine, that they were running out of breeding stock to keep a country going, or might, if they let them go to the front. And America's position was, you should be willing to kill your breeding stock too, for us, for our laptop from Washington war, and not wanting to do, like, they should have talked this over before they started.
Exactly. And for them to come to this conclusion at the end, to one American official, though, it's not an existential war if they won't make their people fight.
Oh, like, so we wanted them to fight a literal existential war where they were willing not only to lose hundreds of thousand people, but all the people who might breed to make more people. Didn't they realize that here was our side of it? We're just going to come in with our corporations, BlackRock and stuff. We want a clear field. If you're not willing to have like an empty parking lot where we just set up and create a new
put a
country,
photo mat in the middle of it,
then what kind of pussies are you?
Exactly. And I mean, for them to say it, it's just such an incredible twist at the end of all this to bring this up, and I don't know. We'll come back to it.
We didn't know what their draft age was until the end of the war.
But I mean, Walter, this is what people like you and I were saying the whole time, is that the math on Ukraine just didn't work. Like, they didn't have the capability to actually win this war unless there were troops coming from some other place.
They no longer. Okay, let's take off the things they didn't have. They didn't have the capability to win the war, and they didn't have the willingness to start winning, because if they started winning, Russia might come back with a nuclear response.
Right.
And here's what Ukraine didn't have. Ukraine didn't have the people to fight the war. Well, technically it had the people, but it wanted to hold in reserve the college age people so they could fuck and make more Ukrainians. But we thought that they should be willing to sacrifice those too, because maybe we could just fill it with Optimus Prime robots someday.
Right. AI Ukrainians.
Like, what are you guys wanting to live and survive and procreate? What are you talking about? We'll just fill it with robots and digital currency and satellites and shit, okay?
It's incredible. I mean, and this is, again, we were all criticized at the beginning for saying things like they want them to fight to the last Ukrainian, and they did,
they did.
So here comes the last detail, folks. I know it's been a long journey, but this is the last thing. Walter, you and I talked about this when it happened before the new year, because we were very concerned when we, not only the United States, but Britain and France started launching missiles into Russian territory. So they were Ukrainians. The Ukrainians, he recalled, were terrified that they too would be abandoned if Trump won. They kept calling, wanting to know if America would stay the course, asking what will happen if the Republicans win the Congress. What is going to happen if President Trump wins?
They probably should have called Trump, because he was being pretty clear on that on the campaign trail. Oh, wait, they were all like in the dark about what Trump planned to do when he's out there saying, I'll end the war in a day.
Exactly.
Every single day on the campaign trail. But the Ukrainians are going, I wonder what he'll do. Really? No.
So here we go. Mr. Trump won, and the fear came rushing in. In his last lame duck weeks, Mr. Biden made a flurry of moves to stay the course, at least for the moment, and shore up his Ukraine project. He crossed his final red line, expanding the ops box to allow ATACMS and British Storm Shadow troops, shadow strikes into Russia, after North Korea sent thousands of troops to help the Russians dislodge the Ukrainians from Kursk. And then it goes on and on to talk about how
one of the first U.S. supported strikes. Now remember, what time is it? Trump has won the election. He's going to be the next president. We've got a couple months until that happens. We know that he wants to stop the war. So what are we going to do? Escalate.
Right.
Oh, okay. So now, with no real chance of winning at all, we're going to launch missile strikes into Russia, risking the nuclear war that was at 50% long ago, and God knows what percent it's at now. And we're going to also start a conflict with North Korea by killing one of their generals that might cause them to attack South Korea. Oh, and we're going to do that in the transition period to a new president. What the fuck?
I mean, it's insane. And, you know, they hold on a second. There's one more thing that's important to note here, which is that this was all happening sort of contemporaneously. Those missile strikes were happening roughly at the time of the G20 summit in Rio. Does everyone remember?
Yeah.
That
Okay.
whole thing?
So America, prepare to receive news so chilling that if you recover from it, it means you're stupid or in a trance. Imagine if at the height of the nuclear confrontation called the Cuban Missile Crisis, which may not have even been this bad because nobody was actually firing missiles into each other's country during the Cuban Missile Crisis, your president had not been JFK, but this man in this condition.
So this is what was happening at that exact time.
Thank you very, very much.
I mean, look.
Your president who belongs in senior care, like home senior care, not the kind where you're allowed to like get your own food, but where it's brought to you, wanders into a jungle. Meanwhile, over in Ukraine, we've never been closer to World War III.
Right.
We're shooting missiles into mainland Russia.
It's incredible.
In America, you put up with it. You watched it. You let it happen. You did not get into the streets. You did not make one sign. You're now protesting Tesla dealerships. But at the time when your demented leader and whoever the band of people were who were running the military of the United States were shooting missiles into Russia, and the commander-in-chief was wandering off into the jungle with his sunglasses askew, you were sitting at home hoping for the best.
So while this incredibly consequential decision was being made by the White House, I mean, it brings up a whole range of issues. Who made that incredibly consequential decision to approve missile strikes into Russia? Was it really Joe Biden? Do we really think?
Did the New York Times say Joe Biden made the decision?
They did not.
They did not.
Actually, yes, they do. They in his last lame duck weeks, Mr. Biden made a flurry of moves to stay the course. So they did say Biden there. But
so they laid that one finally on Biden.
They did. But look, this story is shocking. So somebody asked before why this story now. One can only speculate. There's a lot of things in the ether right now. I would think some of it is that there are going to be things that are about to come out. They want to get ahead of it. Yep. And you know, if a peace deal is struck, there's going to be a lot of hurt feelings on the Ukrainian side, which means there's going to be a lot of there might be a lot of stories told over there. I'm guessing that's what this is about. Otherwise, this is, I mean, as I said in the piece, this is the kind of stuff that you military men get shot for in the field. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like if you betray somebody you fought alongside, you go public and say all these things, you blame somebody else for a military failure, you claim that the incursion into Kursk was completely Ukraine's fault and not ours, even though they did it with our weapons, with our material, and essentially with our say-so. That is heightening the danger for them. It's unconscionable. It's dishonorable. It's dishonest, and that's before we even get to the question of how much we were lied to, as the American public, about all of this. This is all stuff we were all just common sense, ordinary people were saying.
We
This
weren't
is
just
crazy.
Okay. We weren't just lied to about it. We were persecuted for even asking questions. Okay.
Right.
We were persecuted for making the same observations that were apparently being made behind the scenes by our generals.
Belatedly by the idiots. Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
We're now told really that it's a combination of mistakes were made, but we never could have won because there were fundamental design flaws in the partnership. One being that we were asking them to fight on the ground at our behest by just trusting us. And of course, you can't, what happened to Napoleonic wars, let's say, as described in Tolstoy, where the general is up on the top of a hill on his horse, practically touching the troops. Lesson 1, don't try to fight wars using foreign troops from a laptop in Washington. But Adam Entis actually doesn't reach that conclusion. Only
No.
Walter and Matt do reading it. Adam Entis semi-endorses the conclusion that you should be able to fight wars that way if only the people who you're using as your remote control soldiers would be a little bit more obedient and willing to die in greater numbers. Number 2, the Walter conclusion is never fight a war against a giant nuclear power if you're a smaller country and you're unwilling to cause them to unleash that nuclear power. Okay? Probably don't do that. But finally, here is the lesson of lessons for me. Don't ever trust the United States of America. Don't ever.
Yeah, right?
They were telling, listen, the Ukrainians were betting their future, all but their held back breeding stock of 18 to 25-year-old men, on the promise that Joe Biden, this dementia patient, probably wasn't running things. How many times did he probably say, listen, is that Biden guy really running things or is it you? And they went, no, don't worry. He has nothing to do with it.
No, watch this. We can turn this on without even asking.
Right. And then the other thing they trust that Ukraine, poor Ukraine, because this whole thing made me feel really sorry for him, frankly. Really sorry for him. The other thing that they trusted was that Biden would either win again or it would all be over before Trump came in. Like, it's not Trump's fault. The New York Times almost suggests that it's bad of Trump not to persist in this grand fuck up and folly that they just narrated. Oh, and then Trump wants to end it and it's bad. What the fuck, dude? Like, you just did an article about why we should never have been there, all the incompatibilities and the fact that we had to go through a blimp maker in Los Angeles to even communicate with our dudes over in Ukraine. But Trump shouldn't abandon the fight.
Right. It's somehow his fault. Even though he's coming to the exact conclusion, you were too wimpy to execute yourselves, that you should have cut them off. I mean, look, it doesn't matter who was really at fault here. Like, if the relationship was this dysfunctional, you had to stop it. Right.
But here's what I think. Zelensky and Ukraine must have been misled as to the likelihood that Trump would become president. Otherwise, they would have wanted out of this thing a lot earlier.
Of course, Zelensky right now is thinking like my ass is toast. I'm between the CIA and Putin. Like, I don't even know which one I'd rather surrender to at this point. You know what I'm saying?
Here's Zelensky right now. Here's my impression of Zelensky right now tonight. Vladimir Zelensky, he went to that way. My name is, Lucius Provanki, and I am a gypsy thief trying to escape across the border because I stole a horse. Here is $50. Will you let me through?
Oh, unbelievable. Thank you, Paul, by the way. Thank you, everybody, for these. We don't really ask for the tip jar stuff, but it's great. Thank you very much. No, it's horrifying. And as you say, Walter,
here's why they did it now. Because we lost.
Right.
The reason they did it now is because we lost. And we have to revise one of the greatest truisms of history. They say that history is written by the victors, but we just learned that history is actually written by the losers wanting to cover their asses.
Well, we're getting pretty good at that, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, how many times are we going to lose these protracted foreign adventures that were clearly stupid from the beginning and impossible, that had no possible metric for success, that any idiot who graduated high school could see from the outset, but somehow these catch-22-esque characters who run these wars can't see it until it's too late, and then when they finally lose, they go out and they dime out their partners who've sacrificed hundreds of thousands of lives and their whole country.
But dude, we built missiles and we built shells in factories in Pennsylvania and made a lot of money, which we bragged about.
And we also we learned lessons. There's a thing in there about how we learned about
Matt. I'm going to read this because it is truly an oh my god moment in the piece, and that this was written by this Adam Ent who suggests they really found the right guy, because I don't know that he's a human being. I'm not sure. There's not a lot of evidence that he has actual feelings and so on. Oh, where is it?
Yeah, just so people want to know.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, here it is. In some ways, Ukraine was on a wider canvas, a rematch in a long history of U.S.-Russia proxy wars. Vietnam in the 60s, Afghanistan in the 80s, Syria 3 decades later. So we just admitted, Adam did, what I've said on the show. All of the excuses for prolonging the Ukraine war, I already heard back in the early 1970s for Vietnam. Now, our way of making this not Vietnam was we changed some words.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. SMEs.
We didn't call advisors advisors. We called them, whatever. But here is for Americans who think this is a depressing story of another loss, a folly that cost us hundreds of billions of dollars and countless Ukrainian lives, Russian lives, almost led to World War III. And hell, it still might if somebody goes crazy. But here is your consolation. It was also a grand experiment in war fighting, one that would not only help the Ukrainians, but reward the Americans with lessons for any future war.
Lessons.
So listen,
it's training.
It was a grand experiment in war fighting. And the lessons for future wars for Americans are so worth it, man. I'll tell you what the future lesson for Americans should be. Get control of your fucking government and your fucking military and your fucking intelligence agencies, because they don't care if you live or die. They're out to learn lessons and answer questions about whether foreign troops will unquestioningly follow their orders from their laptops 1,300 miles away. And when communications break down, your war fighting grand people are willing to call up blimp makers in Los Angeles and say, Hey, didn't you go to high school with that dude? Can you maybe get him on the phone?
Can you get his number? I mean,
And not only we'll not just do this once, but let's make this our new system where we call you in LA and then you call them and tell them to talk to us.
It's incredible. We couldn't write this stuff, right, Walter? I mean, it would be impossible.
Matt, also the other lesson is, America, you need satire. You need it badly. You need Stanley Kubrick or his equivalent back now.
Joseph Heller, yeah.
You need Joseph Heller. You need Kurt Vonnegut. You need Thomas Pynchon, because if you don't have them, the satire will happen in real life at levels that they won't even be aware of because they haven't read those books and don't realize how fucking absurd they're being.
That, I had that thought reading this, that this guy must not have read Catch-22 or any of those books.
But how about the generals? Have they read it? Apparently
right,
not.
No,
either.
yeah, I don't think they have either. One quick final point. I know we've kept everybody late. Some context on Adamantis and his background. Many years ago, this was one of the first stories in the at the very end of the Obama era. This story appeared in the Wall Street Journal. U.S. spy net on Israel snares Congress. And it essentially describes how the Obama White House inadvertently collected the communications of members of Congress who were talking to Israeli leaders who were opposed to Obama's Iran deal. So they used FISA, and they accidentally listened to members of the United States Congress. I remember reading that story and thinking, this is a gigantic story. Why is nobody picking up on this? But anyway, that happened. And then there is this one that is another one that was a famous Russiagate story. Remember when we just talked about this, the leak of the FISA warrant on Carter Page that went to that left the Senate Intelligence Committee and was reported on by the Washington Post, that allowed them to use this phrase that the warrant had convinced a FISA court judge that there was probable cause to believe that Page was acting as an agent of a foreign power, in this case Russia. So that was this was the story that it was the leak that turbocharged years of Russiagate stories. So those are two pretty consequential stories, and there's more, but I think it's just worth pointing that out.
But Matt, we have succumbed to one fundamental misconception throughout this entire broadcast, which is that Adamantis is telling the truth this time.
Oh.
In other words, here's the real moral. Turn off the TV, close the New York Times, tune in to America This Week, etc. Because the people who lied you into the thing that they are supposedly just telling you the secret truth about are the same people purporting to tell you the truth. And they're not. Because based on their record, there's no reason, if they were in a courtroom and their previous testimony had been of the quality that these people have, they would not be able to get back on the stand. And if they tried to get back on the stand, everybody would laugh. And we should be laughing at the same time we cry and scream that now the secret history has been told. These people want to guide us into a next war or a next whatever. They are thoroughly 100% discredited on Russiagate, on COVID, and now on Ukraine, and on the capacities and prowess of the American president, Joe demented Biden. They have been wrong about everything, and now they are telling you the truth? No,
but they're not telling you the truth, but there are admissions in here that are devastating.
They're telling you enough of the truth so they can lie to you again.
I know, but I think somebody's got to go to jail behind this shit. Like whether it's
For endangering the planet Earth and the human
Yeah.
species, someone could maybe go to jail. I think so too.
there's something here in terms of like how exactly did that Kursk operation happen? Was there really authorization for that? Was that really just the Ukrainians freelancing? Like, I'm not sure. I'd like to, but whatever it is, they endangered the whole world. They knew they were doing it. They got up to a 50% probability in their mind of a nuclear strike. And now that was conditioned on Russia, on them advancing toward Crimea. But still, like that, the fact that they got that far towards nuclear combat and didn't tell us.
And not only didn't they tell us, they were lying about the capacity of the commander in chief at the same time.
It's mind blowing. It's a scandal of like epic proportions.
If America continues relying on these people as its reality guides, it deserves what it gets. Unfortunately, the rest of humanity may suffer too for our stupidity.
Absolutely. Anyway, thanks, folks, for hanging out with us for so long. I am headed to Washington tomorrow early to testify again. But I'll be
what again?
This time it's the Global Engagement Center. So I got to be in DC and at 10 a.m. tomorrow. So it's going to be a long night. But crazy stuff. Walter, thanks for hanging out. Thanks everybody for listening. And look, I strongly encourage everybody to read this ridiculously long article because for me, it's the most shocking piece of journalism I've read in a long time. Like you'll be angry and
it's the most shocking piece since the other piece that admitted that there was a lab leak in COVID.
Right.
Since the piece that admitted that they knew Joe Biden was senile. It's the most shocking piece since the last time they told this a limited amount of truth about an almost unlimited lie that almost brought us to our knees as a society or a planet. I actually would say don't read it if it involves giving the New York Times money.
Oh, well, okay, that's true too. But it's a remarkable thing. Anyway, thanks everybody. Thanks, Walter. And we will see you again soon.